Today I'm gonna talk about the limit using the graph of the function. Before I solve the following two examples, I would like to recall the definition of the limit. Here we have three pictures represent the function of fx. Okay, so now let's take a look at the first curve or the first picture. What is the limit of fx as x approaches a? That means what? That means when x approaches a from both sides. Okay, approaches a from both sides, from left hand side and from right hand side, and we see the curve is approaching this point, and this point is L. Okay, is L, or this point has y value, that is L. Okay, now let's take a look. What is FA? We're gonna draw the vertical line at x equals a. Okay, we draw the vertical line at x equals a, and on the vertical line we can see a solid point on this curve. Okay, and this solid point means is defined on this curve. This solid point has y value, that is L, so that means the FA equals L. Now let's take a look at the second picture. Again, here x approaches a from both sides, from left hand side and from right hand side, and we can see the curve is approaching what? Is approaching this point, right? It's approaching this point, and this point is an open circle, right? Although it's an open circle, but it has the y value is L. Is L. Okay, now let's take a look the FA. We can draw the vertical line at x equals a. Okay, now on this vertical line we can find a solid point that is here. Right, that is here. So that means what? That means this function at x equals a is defined here, not here. Here is an open circle, that means it's undefined. So the only solid point is here, and this solid point is has y value we assumed is m. Okay, we assume the y value of this solid point is m. That means what? That means FA equals m. Okay, and be careful, the open circle means it's undefined. Okay, solid point is defined. Now let's take a look the third picture. When x approaches a from both sides, and we can see the curve is approaches this point. Again, this point has y value L. Okay, so what is FA? We're gonna draw the vertical line on the x equals a, and again we're gonna check whether there is solid point on this vertical line. We find nothing. Okay, only open circle here. That means it's undefined. right? So no solid point on this vertical line, that means it's undefined, or we can say it doesn't exist. Okay, now let's take a look at the first example. For the first example, we can see x approaches 0 from both sides. So 0 from both sides. So 0 is here, right? So we approach 0 from both sides. Okay, and we can see the y value approaches this point, and this point has y value is 2, right? So we have is 2. Now, what is f0? f0, we're gonna draw the vertical line, and we find the solid point on this curve, right? On this curve, that is 2, right? That has y value 2. Okay, so we can directly write down as 2. Now let's take a look the second one. The second one, x approaches 2, right? X approaches 2. We draw the arrows from both sides, and we can see the y value approaches this point, and this point has y value that is 4, so that equals 4. And then we're gonna evaluate f2. That means we're gonna draw vertical line at x equals 2, and we can say on this vertical line we couldn't find any solid point. We can only find the open circle here, so that means it's undefined or it doesn't exist. Now let's take a look at the last one. We have x approaches 1. X approaches 1 from both sides, and we find the curve from the left hand side. It approaches this point, and from the right hand side it approaches this point. So the curve approach different point from different direction. That means what? That means this limit doesn't exist. Okay, because if x approaches 2 different points from different direction, that means this guy doesn't exist. Now let's take a look. The f1. What is f1? f1, we're gonna draw the vertical line. So on this vertical line, can we find a solid point? Yes, we can find a solid point here, and this solid point has y value is 2, right? So that means that equals 2. Now let's take a look the second example. For the second example, x approaches 1 from both sides. So x approaches 1 from both sides. Okay, so how about the curve fx? The curve approaches this point from left hand side, right? And approaches this point from right hand side. That means fx approaches different point from different direction. Means what? Means this guy doesn't exist. So now let's take a look. What is F1? F1, we're gonna draw the vertical line at x equals 1. So on this vertical line, we can see there is a solid point here, right? The solid point here, and this solid point has y value that is 3. So we can write down this guy equals 3. Okay. Now let's take a look the last one. Okay, the last one is x approaches 3 from both sides again, and the fx approaches this point from both sides, approaches this point, and this point has y value that is 1. So that means, okay. And what is F3? We're gonna draw the vertical line so on this vertical line we can find a solid point that is here, right? A solid point that is here, corresponding to the y value that is 3. So F3 equals 3.